Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line, a CMG consulting podcast exploring the pivotal moments where business strategy meets real-world pressure. I'm excited for today's conversation with my partner, Kim Scribner here. We're going to talk about go-to-market, which is an often bandied term. But, I'll start off with, Kim, when you hear that little three-word combo, go-to-market, what does it imply for you?
Yeah. So first, I think the title of our podcast, The Fault Line, and Go to Market work together in a very interesting way because so many things can fall into the fault line when you are trying to bring something to market. And so for me, it implies everything from when you first start thinking about what a new product or feature or service is until customers are actually using it. And all of the minutia steps that have to happen between then. So that includes branding and marketing for a product. That includes all the operational backend for supporting a product. So that can include training for your customer service team is a small example of that. Uh, yeah, all of it.
Yeah, and if anything, I would expand on that. I come at this thinking from concept to commercialization. And even on either end of that spectrum, the insights that lead to concepting, the optimization once in market, you know, we talk a lot on the podcast about what we do at CMG. And, we've done a bunch of episodes on leadership as team sport and how we help our clients act at a championship level as leaders. And, in that same sort of model, the go-to-market elements are really the game plan is articulated and the execution of it in terms of this is our intention. So now let's go and deliver on those intentions and priorities. And it sounds simple. There's so many details there. For anybody who's not watching, Kim has already got a grin on her face. She's like, yeah, let me tell you some war stories.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking back to a specific example, an organization that I worked for that launched a card member loyalty program for one of the large financial institutions. And so there was branding involved. What were we going to call the thing? How did it align to the existing member benefits of people that had that card in their wallet already? And then there were small things like the packaging that we used in the warehouse had to have a logo on it. Well, how did that logo look when it was printed on
Yes.
our only black and white printers, right? So just small little minutia things that we think, fit under this giant umbrella that we call go to market, but every department has to be involved. And so your example or what you were talking about earlier about leaders being aligned is important because clearly the warehouse manager and the marketing team don't often spend time collaborating together on things.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's also, I think, true that great go-to-market is orchestrated. It's a number of different, to the point that you were making, it's a number of different players, each with their own skill sets, who work in coordination. And they understand where there are handoffs, they understand the role they play. And, I don't want to genericize this because there is some art and also very much some science to this. There are game plans that can be put together that ensure the rigor and the success in market.
Yeah. I mean, it's a relay race to a certain extent, right? So when you're handing the baton off to somebody else, you've got to make sure somebody is getting that baton and understands the mission for taking them forward.
Yeah. And I try to think through this, especially as we talk with, our clients on the road to revenue side of CMG, the go-to-market side of CMG, in a way where they can understand the sort of linear aspect, opportunity identification, strategy articulation, the facilitation of, actions and the relationships that go into that, and then the specific actions they take. And at each of those phases, there's a breadth of considerations. So, oftentimes in a marketing or a product management sense, you're thinking through, okay, what are the actions I'm going to take? how is my brand positioned? What kind of equities and appeal does it have? What brand authority does it have? What kind of promotional offers am I going to make? How am I going to innovate and come up with new offers? How do I price those appropriately? Where do I cost reduce? How do I manage my portfolio? Right? There's a rich set of activities just in that one phase, and all ultimately driving towards the things that matter, right? When we go in, and whether it's with private equity or a public company or a startup, right? Ultimately, what we're driving towards is we're going to drive growth in your sales, your profit, and your market share. And, you know, rooting ourselves in those key outputs, I think is fundamental for us, because it starts to frame the choices we make upstream from there in all those go-to-market elements.
Yeah. The part that in the example that I gave a moment ago that was interesting was it was one of the top 3 financial institutions in the US, and we were a startup. And so we had to learn a lot of what we're talking about here today on the fly, like on the job, learning how to integrate with such a specific brand that had very specific messaging and what they wanted their brands to represent. And here we were, about 50 people at that time in Class C warehouse space, trying to figure out how to make this product work with such an important brand. So I think that was a great learning opportunity. That would probably be where I learned what go to market really meant. And before that, it was like something that the marketing people did because, I wasn't involved. But in that moment, seeing all those nuances that you're talking about, Gary, like for them, if this product worked really well, then they got an extra percentage for every transaction that somebody made on their credit card, right? So there was a revenue impact that if this went well, would make a big difference for them.
Yeah. And, for me, some of the examples there, I'll give two. Just this week, talking to the inbound, brand new chief marketing officer at a private equity backed company. One of his first conversations was, "Hey, I look at my team. They're very talented individuals. They've still got gaps in skill set. And, you just gave an example of having to bootstrap and figure this stuff out, which takes a lot of iteration, and there's, some frustrations and things like that. One of the things that we do well at CMG is we've got a team full of practitioners who've learned those lessons and have the scars to prove it.
Sure do.
And for this individual, he's already thinking through, how do I accelerate through that learning curve? How do I sort of help my team start to embrace this? And I think one of the distinctions for us is we don't step in and just tell. I mean, we're happy to provide a playbook and sort of point people in the direction and give them a pat on the bum. And, at the same time, I think some of the richest and sort of most resilient impact that we have is where we're working with the teams to accelerate them through their learning curve and actually hand off where they, at the end of 90 or 120 days, sometimes it might be a little bit longer, but they're capable. And so the next time they come at it with a greater level of maturity and know-how. And, for us, that's the really gratifying part of it.
Well, and I
Um,
think that's an important call out because there was a project that we worked on in the last 12 months here with an association where they were bringing new pricing strategy to market. We had helped them develop the pricing strategy. And in this phase of the project, we were actually supporting the project management group in operations to help them understand how to manage bringing a new product to market. And so there was at times well, that's like an above my pay grade decision. Well, when you're in the project management seat for a go to market, you need to be able to guide all of those decisions. So you're learning how to communicate above your pay grade or, whatever kind of language you want to use because somebody does have to hold it all together. And so I think when you're talking about the teaching people new skills, that resonates with me completely, right? Obviously working in our ways of working space, we are teaching people how to do this well so that they don't make the mistakes maybe we did when we were early in our careers doing this for the first time as
yeah.
practitioners.
And, and again, every client engagement has its unique attributes. I always try to think through what do they need, and what are the commitments that they're willing to make, and how do we best fit those needs? In some cases, they don't want to learn how to do it. They just need somebody to do something for them. And a great part of the go-to-market scheme, where that happens frequently, is early in the activity set. What insights should we derive? How do we look at our analytics or our data in some different ways to draw different inferences and conclusions? How does that then drive ideation and qualification of those concepts to commercialize? For a lot of organizations, and again, I just came out of a conversation earlier today with someone on this topic, we don't have a lot of new ideas. So then there's almost this false preciousness around the ones we have. And there's sort of an aggressive commitment to the one or two things we're working on, rather than stepping back and saying, what alternatives might there be? And so in those cases, oftentimes we'll come in and kind of give the go-to-market scheme of a client a kick in the pants. Let's go undertake a study. Let's work with your team on ideation. Let's create optionality at the start of it so you're refining to the best ideas in your innovation. At the other end of the spectrum, right, and this was a real example from one of our clients, they made an acquisition. They thought it was going to plug in neatly to their portfolio and really struggled with the business development side of things. They just weren't getting traction. And we stepped in and were able to do a competitive review, think deeply about the roots of that brand, and re-articulate its brand positioning in a way that had their head of sales here in North America say to us, you know what, we've gotten more momentum in the 12 weeks since we finished working with you than we had the 12 months prior. And it was really just being able to step in and augment the perspective and bring some of those, hard-earned experiences to bear that said, now, better traction, less wheel spin, better results. And we got it done in a matter of weeks rather than months.
Yeah. I think you're talking about two things in that last little bit there. One is test before you scale. And so I think oftentimes, especially in large organizations, the instinct is to, oh, we have this great product. We know our customers well. We're just going to bring it all to market, to the whole market. We're not testing it. We're just going. And so part of what we bring to organizations is that mindset of, well, what if we pilot something first? What if we go in a certain region first, or with a certain team first? So I think that's an important part of, as you're going to market, where are your testing points? And then also, what is your measurement plan, so that it's not your gut telling you whether you should scale or not, but real data,
Yes.
which we've talked about quite a bit on this episode. One of my kind of just questions for you is, when you think about the big chunks of work that are in a go-to-market and the departments or teams that they hit, can you talk a little bit about that?
For me, this is where there's some fundamentals around running a continuously successful go-to-market engine, right? And I always start with awareness of reality. Are we asking questions of the people we serve? Are we taking a look at not just the competition, but the factors that could be disruptive to our space? Are we digging deeply into what we know about our capabilities and our customers from a data standpoint? Because all of those start to generate opportunities. And without a sense of opportunity, it's funny, we're talking go-to-market, but it's very similar to change management in some ways. There needs to be a moment of imagination. And so that's one. And the reason I say there needs to be a moment of imagination is many organizations, and our clients live this as well, years ago bought into Lean Six Sigma and the idea of optimization. And the joy of optimization is you're taking what you've got today and making it better. The challenge is, over time, you start knocking out the big opportunities to get better, and now you're chasing, with significant effort, incremental, smaller opportunities, and there's diminishing returns. Every once in a while, kicking the pants and a step change innovation is really helpful. And for that, you got to be aware of what your reality is and be able to imagine what the potential futures are. Next
So
phase, big chunk.
always be looking up and out as a
Always be
product
looking,
team.
always be reflecting on your own capabilities and putting it in the context of what's happening on the outside with your customers, your competition, and the context economically, technologically, et cetera. There's so many examples of once successful companies that lost that connection and ended up being disrupted into non-existence.
Yeah. I think this is a different episode, but I'm going to throw this out there, which is what about organizations that don't have a product management discipline?
Yeah, yeah, and there's a that is a different episode, but that then starts to get into the next phase, right? Because sometimes those insights and those analytics are compartmentalized in different portions of the organization. You get into who's accountable then for strategically evolving the value proposition to add more value, to drive to those sales, revenue, profit, and market share key results, and to make choices there. And good strategy drives a sense of intention, priority, and accountability. And then you got the next two big buckets for me in the sort of scheme of what you do in order to deliver on those key results, which is, okay, how are we going to execute this? Do we have the right relationships? Do we have the right technologies, the right processes to do what? And the do
Mhm.
what I touched on earlier, which is all those things that actually potentially add value. And in that space, I always try to remind people, think first about the customers you have. Because as we talked in a past episode, there's only 4 ways to grow a business: acquire new customers, retain a greater proportion, increase frequency of transaction, and add value per transaction. 3 of those have to do with the people you already serve. So don't lose sight of that in
Well,
sort
and
of a shiny object.
when we're
Yeah,
talking about features on maybe an existing product, you could piss those current customers off as well. So that's
absolutely.
something to be aware of.
Or, the flip side is you may have something of real value to them of which they're unaware.
Mhm.
And again, a conversation I had yesterday with the director of content and branded communications for um, a company in the recreational product space. One of her challenges was to help her organization appreciate the value of direct interaction with the customers who already own their
Yeah.
products, because they've kind of left value on the table. They have a couple of differentiating capabilities, and they figured out most of the people who have their product don't even know. And that's a space to build commitment and advocacy and appreciation among your existing customers that becomes a competitive firewall. And go to market is as much around defending what you've got as it is acquiring what you don't. And I think that's one of those principles that we don't often talk about enough, which is this idea of defending what you've got, building value there through, the connection between your customers and your brand in a way that says this is for people like me. And that's probably also another episode at some point
Yeah.
unto
No,
itself.
you've got me thinking also, we work with a lot of organizations in the healthcare space. And in that space, you're not telling a customer like, go get sick and, then come to us, right? But you are still doing go to market activities, right? There might be a new
Absolutely.
treatment that's available at your center. There might be new research that you're doing related to a specific condition. And so there is still this go to market element. It's a little bit different than the way that we're talking about it now, but you still need to create awareness of the capabilities that your organization has, which is really what go to market is about.
Yeah, and that example is a terrific one in terms of bridging the awareness aspect and the sort of strategic thinking,
Mhm.
because different markets are driven by different consumption or demand characteristics. If you're in a, let's say, a carbonated beverage space, you want to increase the share of sips. You want anybody who's thirsty drinking your product. That will drive choices about how you distribute. And this is why if you go to a gas station, you might see a vending machine outside, a fountain pour inside, and stuff in bottles and cans in the cooler, all with the same juice inside, because they're trying to make sure we've maximized the opportunity to deliver on that thirst moment. The other end of the spectrum, healthcare, right? That's a need driven inclination, right? It's not gee, I'd like to go get chemotherapy today.
Right.
It's really, I don't feel well, I need help. But there's still a moment of choice there around who do I believe is going to best fit my needs, get me back on the path to full health, etc.
Mhm.
And understanding some of those characteristics also drives then some of those key go-to-market choices. One of my favorite examples was working in an organization that did insect repellents, right? And, the reality was 90% of their revenue was generated in about 12 weeks over the summer. So from a go-to-market standpoint, it was absolutely essential that they had product on shelf across all their retail locations on display where it needed to be. And they put heavy emphasis behind that, and it was a key to success. Yeah, they wanted brand equity. They had to have the right pricing, but there was this actual put the product where it needs to be element that was fundamental for them, and doesn't play out with the same urgency in some other spaces.
Yeah. And so I'd say 2 things to that. The bugs don't die in Florida in the winter, so send all your
True.
extra repellent here because we need it year round. Um, the other one is you touched on something briefly when we were talking about the healthcare example, which is patients, right? People who need the healthcare. But very important in a go-to-market strategy is thinking about all of the different audiences that might be part of your strategy. So in the case of some of our clients, we're talking about referring providers or providers that might be referring the patients to a
Yes.
center. And so
Yes.
part of go to market is thinking about who those audiences are so that you're not only communicating with the direct end consumer.
Absolutely. And, for for anybody who thinks in terms of a journey or a cycle, right? The truth is it is possible to build advocacy and influence for people at any level there, right? And to and to understand that the people who influence the decision continually evolve. The example that I've used for years is the crisis among grandmothers that occurred when mom blogs started to show up. Because in the old days, and it's not that long ago, if
Yes.
there was a problem with the baby, you called your
Uh,
mom, the baby's grandma. And
yep.
today, tons of new moms,
Yes.
that's a distant consideration. They go online. They're like, tell me what I do here. And they've got 1,000 people just like them who've dealt with it
Yeah. You
much more
just sparked a new
recently.
idea though, Gary. It's like the Nana blog, right? Like, yeah.
Yes. 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 But it's one of those things where, and to your point, as we think about the evolution in a market, as we think about who people go to, where does the second opinion come from? Where is the trusted opinion come from? Those are considerations, when I bring it back to this activity set, right? As we think about brand equity and the affinity that people have for a brand, how for them they perceive it, oftentimes that has to do with the other people, not the organization itself telling a story, but the other people telling the story about the organization. And I worked with a guy years ago who used to say, it was a funny question. When we would come up with ideas, he would ask, "Will it T-shirt?" And what he meant is, can we get this down to a handful of terms that we could put on a T-shirt that other people would talk about? And I think that's also part of this understanding. It's not just in the consumer space either. It's in the business to business space,
Mhm.
right? Whether you're talking about equipment at a rental yard or you're talking about healthcare, this idea of how humans make choice and who they trust to help them with that choice is also part of how we do our work with our clients at CMG, because oftentimes we get very linear, right? And people they sort of focus on, this is what I got to do. These are the dance steps. And if we can just expand that a little and help them see that there are other ways to get to better outcomes, it's often quite fruitful.
Yeah, you just made me think of an example in some volunteer board work that I was doing with our local YMCA, and I was interviewing a non-member, and she was referencing that in the mom groups that she belongs to on Facebook, how much they talk about how good the daycare at our YMCA is. That was not information that we put. Like, we can talk about how great our daycare is all day long, but she was referencing where she got that information. So when we think about the marketing activities in a go-to-market strategy, it's where are people going for information? So when we think about the personas that we serve, to kind of put it in marketing lingo, who's influencing them is an important part of go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. And, influencer, we got to be careful here because when we talk about influencers as part of a go-to-market scheme, um, there is a tendency these days to think of Kardashian type
Yes.
of influencers, right? And there's a cynicism around that because if one of the Kardashians uses a lip balm,
Mm-hmm.
most of the audience is like, okay, that lip balm brand paid that person a lot of money to do this. And some proportion of the audience may go out and try it based on that.
But this is a perfect thing that just happened in one of our healthcare clients, what you're talking about, because there's journalists that work in the marketing team, and we started talking about influencer strategy, and they were like, "What are we going to talk to the Kardashians?" is what they brought up because that's what people think of right off the bat. But there are influencers that are doctors, that are people that are of authority in that space, and so yeah, part of the strategy has to be what do we want to a point you made earlier, what do we want our brand to be associated with as well?
Correct. Correct. And, I did a bunch of work with a brand that in any given year managed well over 1,500 influencer and sponsored relationships. And most of those were micro relationships, right? Where somebody had influence in a very small geographic area, but they were authoritative there. And the thing that was fundamental in that brand's approach to the market was that their influencers were not perceived or were not transactionally motivated. It wasn't a we give you money, so therefore you follow a script. They cultivated relationships where the influencer lived the lifestyle that the brand represented and wanted its customers to perceive. So if you ran into one of these individuals at the grocery store or in a parking lot or saw them online or saw them at in their case, a competition, there was a similarity. There was a unity to who they were and how they represented the brand that, again, when we talk to our clients about this, right, we're trying to help them understand what helps near term and sometimes making some pricing changes, some promotional offers, right? Some bundling of offers. Those can really help in the value per transaction and also help in frequency of transaction. Longer term, building that level of commitment among those you serve because they see themselves in your brand community. That can be super helpful. And these days, as we talk about AI and the role that AI is playing in go-to-market, it can't be understated the role that brand authority contributes to success in the space. There are all kinds of businesses out there struggling right now because they relied on paid search placement to intercept somebody who was looking for a leading brand or looking at a category. And today with AI, increasing numbers of consumers are skipping Google search altogether, and they're just going into their favorite sort of AI solution and saying, I'm thinking about this kind of product. Which one should I consider based on these are my needs? And the thing will give them like, here's 3 to consider. This is the one I think is right for you. And when we talk about trust, it's been remarkable for me how quickly so many humans are trusting what AI is telling them in that space.
Yeah, the
Because,
same humans
yeah,
that said I would never use AI 6 months ago.
correct. But it really shines a light on the frustration that people feel when they're trying to plan travel or buy a TV or look for a commodity in a B2B sense online and look at what the options are. There's a paradox of choice. There's so many results that come back, and it's hard to know which of those to trust, whether you're inside Amazon's environment or you're using Google or others. There's just this overwhelming amount, and it's difficult to understand, well, what's best for me? And AI, at least right now, is providing a believable distillation of all of that into something that's much more easily digestible. Now, that creates its own challenges. As we hear about some of the players in that space embracing paid models, right? They're gonna try and generate revenue off of the trust they've built, and we're gonna have to see how quickly that plays out and potentially turns it into the same thing as a Google search over time, right? But for now, it is disintermediating on e-commerce models and a bunch of others, and it's putting more emphasis on brand authority, brand attribution, leadership, and perceived value.
Yeah. I'm going to try to take us back to our go to market kind of steps, but I'm going to ask you a question towards the end, which is day one, your new product or feature is in market. Is that where your go to market strategy ends?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like any good game plan, whether, it's high school football or leading a multi-billion dollar enterprise, like any good game plan, there needs to be a feedback loop. And to optimize towards success, and success being, sales, profit, market share, adjustments made. And, I like the sports analog in this case because, you know, football is a fairly complex undertaking. You've got 11 human beings trying to execute a game plan against 11 other human beings, and there's a break in the middle of every competition. And over halftime, the real work is, what have we learned from the first half that's going to influence how we shift our approach in the second half for success?
So you're saying
And
we should inspect and adapt.
oh, I love it when you do that bridge. Yes, yes. And so once the product's in the market, I once worked for a consumer packaged goods company that for any major new product initiative required the leaders of that initiative to live with their product once it was in market for at least a year. Because this idea of it's over the line, I'm done, you're it, creates all kinds of potential for hanky panky. And what we want to do is keep everybody going back to where you started. All these different folks inside our organization who contribute to the delivery and creation of value. We want them to be on the same page. We want them pursuing the same objectives. That is a fundamental premise. If we've got sales competing against marketing or operations or customer service, they may feel good about themselves, but one silo beating another doesn't create value. What creates value is when all of the different functions are aligned and serving the customers, who are the ones reaching into their pocket and saying, here's some of my hard-earned dough. I really appreciate what you're giving me.
I think this episode was a great overview of what it takes to go to market. And I think we've spawned a couple of ideas for additional episodes, just
Absolutely.
kind of drilling down into each of the specific things, right? We have touched upon making sure that you're measuring after you go to market, but we didn't talk about, like, when do you create that measurement plan?
Oh,
So
yeah.
that happens really early in the process, is what are we trying to accomplish and how are we going to measure it? We've got to be thinking about that way ahead of when we actually go to market.
And the cycle, this is where the engine analog for go to market is really crucial, right? You've got to have fuel in it, you've got to keep it running optimally, and you got to keep it going. And whether it's, hey, let's size the potential in a new white space for us, or it's how do we think about our customer base and retaining a greater proportion, or how do we reposition our brand for greater appeal in new customer acquisition, or today, a thing that we do on a regular basis at this point is think through, how do we take the various data streams that are available, internal, publicly available, purchased external, and generate a solution in the middle, which we do with our smarts and with AI, to optimize the effectiveness of your sales and marketing teams. Once your product or service is in market, how do you make sure that you can actually go capture the value out there of the people who would find it most important? All of those are things that we could dive into. But again, I would just say, go to market is not a simple individual thing unto itself. It is a set of actions that, with coordination and orchestration, generate value and beat the competition. And as somebody who's fairly competitive myself, I love beating the snot out of competition and helping our clients do it.
I think what we have talked about today just shows, on the CMG side, we help organizations at every step of what we've talked about today.
Yes.
So whether it's creating the pricing strategy for your new product or actually executing on the delivery of it, we have worked with organizations in all parts of that, including challenging times when, you can't get materials for the product you're creating, and how do you
Yes.
manage those orders, right? Like we've done
Yeah.
from soup to nuts there. So looking forward to discussing more of these in detail with you, Gary.
Yeah, and as anybody can tell, I get pretty excited about this stuff. I love this stuff. I love the complexity of it, and I love helping our clients go win, whether it's individual facets of that whole go-to-market scheme or it's really building the scheme itself. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning and gets me excited.
Yeah. Part of what you and I were chatting about this morning and preparing for this episode was that the place that gets me really excited is that change leadership surrounds go-to-market, right?
Absolutely.
You cannot do go-to-market without having good change leadership, because every part of your organization is being asked to change in some way when you're bringing a new product to market.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when there's big innovation coming, because the cascade of difference throughout. Hey, we're going to have to figure out how we build this new thing. We're going to have to figure out how we service the new thing. We're going to have to figure out how we talk about this new thing, right? So many threads there. And yeah, I appreciate everybody who's been listening so far today. And I think we've queued up a few topics for us to continue the dialogue about over the coming weeks and months. And as always, thank you, Kim Scribner, for being my partner on The Fault Line, CMG Consulting's podcast, where we talk about strategy and reality and how we bridge those two things together. Find us anywhere you get your podcasts, or come to cmgconsulting.com to find it there. But as always, appreciate everyone who's listening, and tell your friends about us, because we think we've got something good going on here. Till next time, take care.